Okay, given that this is a short webinar, I am going to get going as people start to trickle in. So good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the second of the Northeast Cover Crop Council short webinars. Today's session qualifies for 0.5 crop management CCA CEUs. We will put up the slide with the needed information and QR code at the end. This talk's going to be about 20 minutes long. There will be about 10 minutes at the end for questions. Please do feel free to put questions in the chat as they come to mind, or else you're certainly welcome to speak up at the end as well. My name is Victoria Ackroyd. I am the program manager for the Cover Crop Council, and I will be helping to moderate this session. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available afterwards through both the University of Vermont Extension and the Northeast Cover Crop Council website. Our thanks to our partner, Susan Brulette at UVM, for assisting with the webinar. Without further ado, today's speaker is Jason Lilley. Jason Lilley is an assistant extension professor with University of Maine Extension and a Northeast Cover Crop Council board member. His focus is on improving the overall environmental and economic sustainability of commercial farm operations. His work emphasizes identifying and connecting growers with strong markets, creating healthy soils and resilient farming systems, and long-term planning for commercial agricultural enterprises. He is also focused on working with beginning farmers to develop long-term successful operations. His research involves reduced and conservation tillage practices for vegetable production, cover cropping strategies, and climate change adaptation for farms. Thank you for presenting today, Jason. The screen is yours.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Victoria. Just get my screen shared. Let's see, can you see that full screen? Okay. All right, great. So in this session, I'm going to be talking about cover crop species selection for vegetable systems. And that includes vegetable systems that include long-term rotations and maybe long-term fallow time periods in that rotation. So the overall plan for this session, we're going to talk about and give some background about what is. Oops.
Excuse me, Jason, I'm sorry. If you want to have it in slideshow mode, you're certainly welcome to throw it into that mode.
Okay. Did that fix it?
I think if you go to view and then, oop, now we've lost your screen entirely. Okay, so screen sharing's begun again. You can probably go to view and then click show slideshow, or else there's a red box circled around on the screen you're currently on with a slideshow and resume slideshow.
Try to just go to a different screen.
Sorry about that.
How about that?
There we go. Cool beans. Thank you.
I knew we'd figure it out. Okay, so the plan for the session is to give a little background about what is unique about vegetable systems as compared to a lot of our other agronomic cropping systems. Then I'm going to provide an argument for why a written crop rotation plan is going to really help with your cover cropping planning and implementation. We'll highlight some tools for understanding the different characteristics of different cover crop species and how they fit into a rotation plan. And then we'll wrap up by going through a few examples of different cover crop options that fit into these very diverse and complex crop rotations. Okay, so this is the interactive portion of the program. So feel free to write into the chat or unmute yourself and shout out. What are some key considerations that you run through when selecting species for any cropping system? So kind of as an example, what are some reasons that would want you, or that would lead you to planting winter rye as opposed to sorghum Sudan grass?
How late I'm running getting it into the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So time of year is a big one.
We've got someone who says weed suppression, fertility added, and ease of termination.
Yep. See, we'll wait for input from maybe one more person. I think that between
Pricing potentially?
sorry, what was that one?
Price or cost of seed?
Absolutely. Cost of the seed. So that would influence one species over another potentially. Okay. So time of year, obviously, that's a very key component. Sorghum Sudan grass is not going to do very much if you plant it in late September. The time period that the field is available is another key consideration. So if we have a 40-day window, you know, putting yellow sweet clover out there is, again, not going to be worth the while. The specific desired goals, are you looking for nitrogen fixation or weed suppression? You're looking to capture nutrients from leaching out of the system. And then the general field conditions. So what's your available moisture in that field at the time that you're seeding, fertility, weed populations and pressure, absolutely. And lastly, and this is a really big and important one, how you're going to terminate that cover crop and how much residue is that going to leave behind. So for our vegetable systems, we really want to keep this in mind as far as the time of year that we're able to plant, the duration that it's in the field, and the termination method and the residue that's left behind. So zooming out and kind of just to give a little background related to vegetable production systems and their complexity. I stole this from the website of one of the farms that I work with. And we can see that these folks, they have a farm stand that's open 7 days a week. And then they go to farmers markets. There's 4 separate farmers markets, and Portland is 2 days a week. So there's 5 days a week that they're going to market. In the wintertime, they're going to market 3 days a week. Then in addition to that, they have the 25-week free choice CSA. They have wholesale accounts, restaurant accounts, senior farm share, WIC customers, and all of these like huge variety of market outlets. They require a big diversity of products, and that those products are available for as much of the year as possible. So there's a lot that these folks are balancing on a really day-to-day basis throughout the entire year. So this is just my home garden, and it's about 1/3 of the garden. And here we have but I think that it's a good example of a kind of scaled back version of what a lot of these farmers are dealing with. So over on the left, we have my winter squash patch that has 8 different varieties of winter squash. Then we have 6 varieties of tomatoes, 2 varieties of eggplant, 5 varieties of peppers, the first succession of summer squash and cucumbers, 3 varieties of cucumbers, 3 varieties of beans, sweet corn, sweet potatoes, the second succession of summer squash and cucumbers. And again, that's only the warm season crops, and that doesn't include the 1/3 of the garden that is fallow and the 1/3 of the garden that is cool season crops, that is just as diverse, if not more so. So, you know, all that to say, these are very complex systems, and we have plantings happening all throughout the year, harvest happening all throughout the year. So it really makes the idea of getting a cover crop in more complicated. So one way that I work with my growers to try to wrap our heads around what's happening when in what portions of the fields is by laying out these crop rotation kind of calendars. This is obviously just an example, and it's obviously overly simplified, but that's for demonstration purposes. And you can see here that across the top, we've numbered the weeks of the month. Ideally, this would actually be the weeks of the year, so 1 through 52. And that helps us get a sense of like when things are happening. And we can start out by listing by bed or by field, depending on the scale of the farm, what's going to be in each of these beds or fields throughout the duration of the year. So this is kind of my overly simplified demonstration version. This is an actual example, and this is one of 16 pages from this farm that I'm working with. And you can see they've got the crops that they're planting, little blocks where they're going to be disking the field, or they're going to have fallow windows, and then they're going to go in with another succession of a crop. So, certain fields, they've got, 3 or 4 successions all within one block. So these are laid out to get a sense of what's happening in an individual year, bed by bed. And that's, you're going to gain a lot of information from that, but it's equally as important, I would argue, to get a sense of what's happening year over year, and to remember that, when you pull your cash crop out in September, that doesn't mean that it's just going to be a free-for-all next year necessarily, that you need to plan for your cover crop accordingly so that you aren't going to interfere with what's happening the next year. So this is an example of a multi-year crop rotation plan. And, if you have a 3-year rotation, you just put 1, 2, 3, and then you'd assume that when you finish here, more than likely, you're going to be able to just loop back up to where you were on year number 1. So between our single year crop rotation plan and our multi-year crop rotation plan, what are some aspects of that we're learning from these tools that are related to our cover cropping scheme? Any thoughts on that to put into the chat? We got a quiet group eating lunch today, I guess. So, so here we can see that we're learning about our calendar dates. When are the blocks when our cash crops are in the field, and then when they're back out again? And what are the windows and the duration of the windows when the fields are fallow or able to be cover cropped? We can learn, what that duration is as well. How long of a window do we have? We can also look ahead and see what's going to be planted next. And that's really important for the time of year that it's going to be planted, but also to help us think through what's the seed size and the planting method. So if we're going to transplant tomatoes and winter squash into a field, it can be pretty trashy. It can have a lot of residue there. If we're going to direct seed lettuce and carrots, we're going to need a very fine seed bed. So we're not going to want to have, a 6-foot tall sorghum Sudan grass that we're trying to get chopped up to direct seed into immediately after. And again, that level of soil preparation. This also helps us with our seed orders and planning ahead. I often will get a call in late August and folks will be saying, well, we want to do oats and oilseed radish. I'm like, well, do you have your seed yet? Do you know how much seed you're going to need? There's a good chance that the seed suppliers are going to have to order that in, and you might not get it until we pass the window where it actually makes sense to plant that. So, just like we're ordering all of our corn seed for the year, we need to also, it's going to make your life a lot easier and make it more likely that you actually get a cover crop in if the seed is on hand. So, so here's what we learned from our crop rotation plan. And then if we also think back to what considerations need to go into selecting species for the year. So that first question that we posed in like the second slide there, we see that from the crop rotation plan, we're learning the calendar dates when things are in and out. And that's critical, to know what time of year these different cover crops are going to thrive, or it doesn't make sense to plant them. We're also learning how long the fields are open for, which is important for selecting if a cover crop species is going to be worth planting. Then when we're thinking about what's going to be planted next, we need to think about the termination method and the residue and how that relates to the seed size and the planting method for the next crop and the level of soil preparation that's required. So just making that connection that the crop rotation plans that are written down that we've thought through really help us to select species that are going to make the most sense and make our systems, thrive. One more way to think about this kind of species selection is using this little quadrat here. So we've got on one axis our winter hardiness, whether it's going to survive the winter or it's going to be winter killed. And on another axis, we've got our low residue cover crops versus high residue. So again, if we're direct seeding, if we're transplanting late season crops like a tomato that's going to go in late May or June, we have the time where we can incorporate a lot of residue, and the residue is not really going to interfere with our planting process. So we can stick with a winter hardy high residue cover crop. Whereas our direct seeded early crops like our spinach and lettuces and beets that are going in early in the spring, that we're going to want to lean towards a low residue and a winter killed, so we have less residue that we're dealing with in the springtime. So I'm going to just take a second and really fill out this one example of a crop rotation plan, a multi-year plan, and kind of explain why some of that, why these species were selected. And this is a pretty simple cover crop plan, but we'll start out walking through that. So let's say that this farm had a perennial hay crop, and they decide to plow that under and incorporate it in late summer. So after they got their first cutoff, then they incorporated it right away. So there probably were some perennial weeds that came up in there. So they're going to use buckwheat in the middle of the summer to outcompete some of those weeds that were in there. And we know that the buckwheat it breaks down really well. It doesn't leave a lot of residue behind. And then when we plow that under about 45 days after planting, let's say we're in mid-August, and we'll put in our oats and peas, which we know will winter kill. And that residue will break down over the springtime and make it fairly easy to incorporate that so we can get our small seeded, spinach, beets, salad mixes. We can get that in really early in year 2. Then we'll go right from that into some more small seeded fall crops. And when those come out, we'll do a fall seeding of a winter rye, which will overwinter. We'll let that get a lot of biomass on it in the next spring of year 3, which will work really well to, add organic matter to the soil and make it so that we can, get that incorporated, have all the benefits of a big cover crop. And that will happen before we do our warm season transplanted crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and melons. We'll go from that into a winter rye. And because we don't want to deal with a lot of residue, we got the benefit of the live cover crop over winter, but we will incorporate that when it's really small, really early in the season. and then plant oats and field peas so we get some nitrogen fixation before our brassicas and lettuces. And then, continue on down the system, kind of plugging short windows of rye in throughout. So that's kind of that thought process, thinking what happened before, what's going to happen next, and how does our plan and our cover crop species selection interact with all that. So again, very simple, just essentially rye and oats and peas. But that's a very effective and very common selection of cover crops that works for a lot of folks. So getting into a couple of tools that can help with this planning process and the species selection process. Managing cover crops profitably is a really, really useful book. I have that right on my desk at all times. One of the most, useful components of this are the tables. There's about 12 tables in there that are just packed full of information. And this chart in particular has, very general concepts of when what time of year these different species of cover crops are best suited to be planted and established. So our oats, late summer, early spring, winter, a lot of options there. But then like our sorghum Sudan grass, we are really limited to just late spring and early summer for that. So just a lot of good information. And then as far as the overwintering, you might want to just look at the hardiness zone and figure out how that fits in with where you are. But so there's one tool that I would recommend. You can get that. You can either purchase the book or there's a free PDF download that's available. Another tool that's available, and this is a project that the board of the Northeast Cover Crop Council is very proud of. This is one of the first tools that we released. And this is the output from our species selector tool. So I went through and I entered the address where my property is. I entered site conditions about soils and risk of flooding. And then I entered 3 goals that I was trying to get out of a cover crop, which included nitrogen scavenging as goal number 1, suppresses winter annual weeds as goal number 2, and increase soil aggregation as goal number 3. And then I also entered when I was going to have a cash crop planted and then harvested. So that's all represented here on the table. And then it prioritizes and ranks what would be the best options to accomplish my goals in the time window that I'm looking to plant the cover crop. So I'd highly recommend everybody kind of checking out the Northeast Cover Crop Council's species selector tool, playing around with that, and definitely, providing any feedback that you have for us as well, as far as how well that's worked for you. So to run through a few examples just quickly, let's say that we have a planting of garlic, and then that's going to come out in early August. Then we're going to go in with winter greens there in mid-September. That leaves us about a 40-day window. And if we had our seed in place, we could do a really quick planting of buckwheat. That grows very quickly. It suppresses weeds and it doesn't leave a lot of residue behind. So that would make it so we could get those greens planted. So buckwheat's really good for mid-season, quick plantings. Let's say that we have a kind of maybe second succession of cucumbers and summer squash. Let's say we had a oat and radish planting the fall before. That residue is going to hang out in the field. We know that the next season we're going to have carrots and small seeded crops in this bed. So we'll do something that's going to winter kill like oats and peas or oats and tillage radish, and that will set us up really well for the next season. If we knew we were going to go into tomatoes or transplanted crops in those same beds, then that would give us a really good planting window to get our winter rye and hairy vetch in, get a lot of biomass for the next spring. So 2 different scenarios that could follow the same summer succession crop. let's say we had early planting of broccoli. That's going to come out mid-July. So we have a whole summer where we can let that let that field lay fallow, and we could do, you know, annual ryegrass and crimson clover if we wanted something with just a little bit less biomass. But if we did want all that biomass, we could do sorghum, Sudan grass, sunflowers, and cowpeas, and that's going to winter kill, but really get us a lot of weed suppression and nitrogen fixation. So I work with a lot of folks who are opening up new fields. I was actually working for this farm in the picture here, and they had a lot of quackgrass in this field that they opened up. It had been just a perennial pasture for a long time. So when we plowed that field, there's a lot of quackgrass that just kept popping up. So we wanted to regularly, you know, plow and incorporate and chop up the rhizomes for the quackgrass. So we use short season cover crops, oats and peas, plow, buckwheat, plow, oats and peas, and then that winter killed to try to knock back that perennial grass that was in there. If we didn't have those perennial grasses, we could again go with the high biomass cover crop. And then we could set ourselves up for another full year of fallow by going with oats and medium red clover. Medium red clover would overwinter and thrive that next season. We could also plant winter rye and then frost seed the medium red clover over that and have a really nice stand like this that gets established. And so lots of different options, lots of different tools to help us, you know, pick what species makes the most sense. So, you know, that kind of quick overview that we just had, but, you know, the summary is to just make sure that as you're putting these plans in place and selecting species, you're looking back at what just is coming out of the field, and you're looking ahead to make sure that you don't have any negative consequences between your cover crop and the cash crop you're about to put in. Also stressing that there's a lot of benefits to the written crop rotation plans and how those can help with planning. So even if you're not gonna, you know, take the step to actually make that written plan, using that as a tool for your mental planning process. And then, you know, just make sure that you're using all those available tools that can help you find more unique cover cropping approaches that are going to help you to achieve more of the goals that you're looking to get out of your cover cropping strategy. And
Thank you, Jason. Excellent presentation. I think the group may have been quiet because they're so busy looking at your slides. We actually had a request to find a way to maybe link the slides with the webinar if possible for posting, or maybe we could turn them into a PDF. I know files with lots of pictures are hard to email to a group.
Mhm.
Susan and you and I can try to figure that out. But I know we only have like 1 minute left technically for this webinar, but do we have any questions? Feel free to speak up. Thanks, Susan. Well, since there don't seem to be any questions, I'm going to go on ahead and throw the species selector link into the chat. Oops, what about insect pests, Jason? Could you comment on cover crops and insect pests and vegetables?
Yeah, that is a huge topic of discussion, especially with brassica cover crops. That is one that, you know, we actually don't see a lot of evidence of, you know, flea beetles and other insects getting onto an oilseed radish that was planted in the fall time, but it is absolutely a risk, and you are planting another host for a lot of vegetable diseases as well. You know, just in our vegetable crops, we have a lot of alternaria that's popping up this time of year. So I am usually reluctant to encourage folks to plant brassica cover crops in their cover crop mixes on veg farms. But that doesn't mean that it definitely shouldn't happen. It's just a risk to be aware of.
Thank you. So at this point, I would like to wrap up the formal part of this presentation by again saying thank you and noting that the CCA credit information is on your screen right now. Jason, Ken Staver, who was asking about insect pests, says that his experience very much supports your recommendation.
Great.
So with that, thank you everybody for attending. I'm going to go on ahead and stop recording. If anyone has any questions about the CCA credits, please do contact Susan Brulette. I know that the QR code is the preferred way to qualify for those nowadays. And hopefully we will see everybody next week for our next installment in this webinar series. Let's see, I'm gonna recording. Where's my recording button? Okay, chat, react, host.